Hello YouTube, this is Morgan Airspeed Prime here with my next Sword Art Online video. This is going to be my review for Sword Art Online Volume 27, which is Unital Ring 6, so the 6th volume of Unital Ring. So yeah, we're 6 in, and it still feels like we are in the setup stages. I think there are still some underlying just things about understanding what we're actually trying to accomplish here that still haven't been revealed yet. Like, why have all the games merged together? What are we hoping to accomplish if we do succeed and get to the center of Unital Ring first? No idea. On the Underworld side of things, because that's been a big focus the last couple of volumes, who is Eoline? What's the mystery with him? We still don't get the answers there. Even though last volume in the afterword he said we would, but then in the afterword this time he says, sorry, I was writing about Alice so much I had to basically push the Eoline reveal or first reveal about him into the next volume. And it's like, ugh, okay, fine. Overall, like, I think this is another good volume of Sword Art Online. I think when the arc is done, and this is just one of however many volumes it is, it'll be fine. The problem is, like, right now, when, you know, we waited like 6 months in English for this, the next volume hasn't even been announced yet. We have no idea when volume 28 is coming out. Not even in English. We don't even know when it's coming out in Japan. There's no listings, cover, or anything like that for it yet. Same with Progressive. We don't know when the next SAO novel is coming out. And that's the main takeaway, I think, from the end of this, is that this feels like an ending that needed relatively quick follow-up on multiple fronts, as we'll kind of get into. But it doesn't look like it's here. Because there are a few very, very interesting things that happen in this volume. Really obvious stuff is just the references that are made to what feels like nearly all aspects of SAO. Especially some of the more, like, related kind of plot points. Like, Mooncradle feels like it's heavily referenced in this, and that they're clearly using this as the way to act as the full-on sequel to Mooncradle. So that Mooncradle isn't, as we go on, I think, going to just exist as this kind of half-finished random 2-volume arc that we did. So much of what's happening here feels like, there we go. The time skip of what happened during the reign of Star King and Star Queen, Kirito and Asuna, is beginning to play out, and they're relating this to some of that stuff from Mooncradle. One of the big reveals we get when they introduce another one of the games that's playing Unital Ring, and that being Apocalypse Date, is that one of the NPC groups that they encountered was the Dark Elves. Specifically the Dark Elves from Liusula from SAO. And immediately there's the connection to Progressive, Elf War questline, Kismel type stuff being brought up here. But what's interesting about that is that that arc hasn't been completed yet. That's not there in Progressive. We have not seen the resolution to Kismel. So the idea is that, whoa, what are we doing here? Because they're almost teasing the idea that depending on how maybe the next volume or two goes, we could potentially have Kirito and Asuna meeting up with Kismel again if she ends up being maybe confirmed to be alive somehow here. But we also don't know how her arc ended in SAO. But what we get here in the scene where it's referenced alludes to sort of, okay, something bad happened, or at least the implication of something bad happened, and they kind of, in a way, fear the worst, but have hope because of what's going on here. Kind of interesting. Even the random stuff in, say, like, Chapter 2, where it's Asuna being given a robot cat that with an AI inside it, and basically what that's all about is like, okay, that kind of relates to some of the real world kind of technology, application of technology plot. Wrath want to use this as like a kind of a product, effectively turn this into a product. This will be how they make money and help to maybe support Underworld, or is there something more going on? It's kind of interesting, but I think you would definitely say from a lot of our main characters, they don't maybe do as much as you do perhaps kind of want them to, because there is still frustrating stuff. Like, for instance, it feels like the whole reveal of a character in Deep Freeze, the whole Aeline, Oiline, whatever way you want to pronounce his name, that has just remained this reveal, this cliffhanger for like for volumes upon volumes. Like, it just keeps getting pushed off, and it's like, here's more characters who are in Deep Freeze, because that's a lot of what happens in this book in the early section when it comes to like what's happening in the Underworld, is this kind of backstory stuff about, oh yeah, here's all this timeline stuff that happened in the Star King era that we don't really know about, because again, remember, we have skipped generations between when we were actually in Underworld and where present day is. This is why we have the whole dynamic of sort of Ronier and TS now being able to sort of interact with their descendants like 6 generations on from them, and it being this real idea of these are integrity knights and these are integrity pilots. They are different, but it's the same type of thing. And how do you kind of really feel about that? And sort of how we got here. Why aren't they knights? Where are the rest of the knights? This was talked about in like the previous volume, and we get into quite a few things here. So like it's not that the book just doesn't have anything in it. It's just, I really want to come out of one of these books with just the idea of, finally, there it is. There's the reveal that makes me now kind of get what we're doing here. And I still feel like we're a little bit kind of still grasping at straws, and that Reiki Kawahara is still broadening and kind of expanding out this thing before he finally commits to doing some reveals. And then this gets complicated by the whole idea of like, where are the volumes? Where's volume 28? Where's Progressive volume 9? They're not on the schedule right now. And that is frustrating. So let's kind of just get going kind of through it, sort of roughly kind of chapter by chapter. The first chapter is kind of mostly like basically Ronier and TS and Selka's reaction to Oiline. And Selka is the one to say, basically, are you Yu-Gi-Oh? Is that Yu-Gi-Oh? But has to be told, no, it's not. Ronier is shocked, but she's more shocked in a way on behalf of TS or Tisei, whatever way you want to pronounce her name, because she has the reaction of like, my old love, flame, whatever way you want to say it, what could have been in so many ways. She still has those feelings even after all these years, just seeing someone who looks identical to Yu-Gi-Oh. And it's interesting, but they don't reveal anything about Oiline right now, and so it just sort of feels like, move on, because we're not revealing anything yet. The focus here really is a lot of the other stuff. It's now that we have some characters who have experienced the time gap that we skipped over, we now have perspective into what has happened, in a deeper kind of way. So we start to go into a lot of the details on this side of the story about stuff like, okay, how did we basically, quote unquote, discover how to actually do deep freeze, do age freezing as well? Because again, the reason Ronnie and TS are 70 years old or so, but look like they're still in their mid-20s, is because they did the age freeze thing that basically Administrator did to look so young. But they then also went into deep freeze, as many of the other Integrity Knights did, to, quote-unquote, end the Integrity Knights for now. And this is why we have the Integrity Pilots instead, and the Knights are known as the kind of legend of, like, what will happen when they eventually do return type situation. And so there's all this history about sort of the rediscovery that kind of these techniques that gets brought up here. They do go into details about like the reasoning in a way behind why certain characters are and chose to do these type of things. That is quite interesting. Like they explain that the reason Tisa did age freeze was because Renly had already had age freeze done to him by Administrator, so he was always going to look the way he looked as we see him. He is revealed to be who Tisa has children with, so that made sense, because I think they were what he asked her to marry him, but she left the question unanswered temporarily, I think, in Mooncradle. Now we have the reveal that, okay, they eventually did get together, had children. That's that. But eventually, when Tisa kind of was aging, and she was going to become and look, I suppose, quite a bit older than him, that was beginning to affect their relationship. So she pushed for the age freeze to be kind of rediscovered. She obviously had it done, and they more or less established that Ronier kind of followed in Tisa's kind of footsteps to kind of support her in that regard. And it's a similar thing with the deep freeze, where Renly made his decision as an integrity knight, and so she supported him, and then Ronier did the same. They don't reveal who Ronier had children with. Alice, I think, alludes to the idea of like, should I ask, or would that be considered like kind of talking and gossiping about stuff that I probably shouldn't be? But she does ask the question in her head, so that, I guess, might be revealed later on if it's important. But that's a kind of a bit of an interesting one, and a lot of this comes out kind of through Alice and Selka kind of talking again after all this time. They do establish stuff that, like, you know, Selka is like really skilled at this point. Like, she is full on kind of leader of the sort of like magic focused kind of wing of you know, the organization, and is incredibly skilled at all of this stuff, including the whole idea that she can prepare multiple batches of the kind of reverse deep freeze to do what happens at like the end of the book. And Alice is super impressed by the fact that she's able to do that. So very kind of cool stuff. And again, they're playing with all these interesting dynamics of Alice at this point obviously is this character who only has a couple of years of memory, and again is missing basically everything about Alice Zuberg's kind of past, but it still considers, you know, Selka her sister. And then there's this dynamic where like Selka is now kind of, you know, basically older, has more kind of in a way life experience than Alice, but Alice is still her big sister, and they've missed these different kind of periods of each other's lives, but they still have a good relationship. It's kind of cool the way it kind of pans out. Chapter 2, that was basically chapter 1 and 3 together. Chapter 2 is very interesting because this is where we get basically the transition. So the first chapter ends with basically like, you know, Kirito and Asuna basically quickly explain some stuff. Their time limit comes to an end in Underworld, so they're forced out because they have to like eat and stuff like that. But they also have to go home. So Kikuoka is going to drive them home. And so we get this interesting scene of him talking to them in the car. And he basically gives Asuna this present, which is this AI robot cat that Higa made. And the idea here is it's a bit weird. Like, it mostly works, but it has some weird traits that aren't particularly cat-like and are the only things that make it feel kind of unrealistic. But that Wrath seems to want to try and turn this into a product where they can make money from it. And that money can be used to support the Underworld, which is interesting. Now, they're going to do a lot of the research stuff, and they're going to leave it to a different company to do the sort of mass production aspect of it. But the final step that they need to execute on the kind of robot cat product thing is they want a better sort of AI program for the cat. And they hope to do this by getting it from Underworld. Because Underworld, of course, the whole idea of it, the reason it has created actual AIs, is that it's just been this sort of like simulated world that's been allowed to run for generations upon generations upon generations, with the idea being that everything is evolving and learning. And that includes the accuracy of like the programs that make animals responses and reactions accurate. And so they're hoping that you can go in there and through Alice, they can use the fact that she's like a machine body and she can basically get the data of an AI cat in that world, basically download its code, bring it out, and they can use that to make the perfect AI cat that has, you know, basically this perfect kind of system. In the same way that like the AI humans are fully real, like Alice is just as much of a character as Asuna, that sort of thing. This cat would be just as much of a cat. And so it's this kind of cute scene as, you know, Asuna is given this prototype to sort of look after and see how it goes. And, you know, she's dropped home. She plugs it in to charge. And they do contrast that. Like, when it's working, it's like a normal cat. It's perfectly fine. It's great. It's cute. But then the fact that she has to turn it off and charge it is a little bit weird to her. And there's a bit of a kind of question of like, is it just what they say it is? That this is just a thing that is here as a way to make money to support the Underworld? Because that was a plot point early on, is that Underworld doesn't seem to have the support anymore. And if they pull the plug, it's the death of like all of those people, basically. And so there needs to be this support. And is that the way to make this happen? Something that will really earn them money in this way. It's quite clever, interesting. Then Kirito and Kikuoka get to talking, and most of this is about like, oh, Kirito, have you found out anything more about the intruder in the Underworld? I think that again has been alluded to for a couple of volumes. No real progress. They get to talking about a few other kind of little bits and pieces, but it effectively just comes around to like, okay, they talk. He drives him home. It's still a little bit far away. He says, Kirito, you should probably go to sleep. Kirito's like, no, I'm still good. But then he eventually does go to sleep. There's one very, very interesting part that happens that stood out to me. I don't know if it's meant to be significant at all, or if it's just meant to be some mild emotional kind of connection here. But as Kirito is beginning to kind of drift off to sleep, he gets deja vu over the idea of like in a car being driven by someone, and he connects this back to the past and also being in a similar situation, about to fall asleep in a car. Deja vu hit me in that very moment. Long, long ago, it seemed, I had once gazed at the stars from a vehicle moving at a steady speed, just like this. Well, of course I had. Our family went out for the evening all the time when I was a little kid, but in my vague memories, it wasn't Dad or Mom who was holding the steering wheel, ... And then basically he kind of almost drifts away at that point to sleep. What's that about? Are they alluding to some interesting aspect of his past? And then like when he says Dad or Mom there, does he mean the people who are his guardians right now, or is he referring to his like biological mother and father who like don't think we've ever seen? That whole aspect of things. I don't know. It's just a weird random paragraph in the middle of stuff that overall doesn't quite like maybe amount to maybe all that much. So it's an interesting one. The other takeaway, this more connects towards the end of the book, is that it's implied that I guess when he does drop Kirito off, he does give Kirito a portable soul translator, which explains why Kirito can later kind of instantly arrive on the scene to help Alice and Oiline out in the Underworld at the end, when otherwise the setup is, wait, this is going to go wrong in about 10 minutes, but Kirito needs an hour to basically get a taxi to the Roppongi office to go to the actual soul translator. It's over. But then he turns up. How did you turn up? Portable soul translator. So they never cover the idea of like the scene of when it's given over or anything like that, but it's just quickly mentioned right at the end. Portable soul translator. So that's an advancement of the tech I don't think we knew about at all before. Interesting stuff. So that's all that stuff. Then we get basically, Asuna's dropped home. She immediately goes into Unital Ring, and then Kirito basically follows suit when he does arrive home as well. So they both basically get caught up to speed on what's happened since the end of the last volume, which again, was the whole boss battle against the Wasp, because they're trying to go up the first, like, basically step in the world to get further into the middle, because the whole layout of the world, again, all the games are basically placed on the kind of spokes on the outside of the kind of wheel, in a way that is the world, the circle, and they have to head inwards to the center where they'll get everything if they win. We don't know the details. But as you go further in, the progress, you're hindered by the fact that you basically have to do boss battles to get up the level. There's just these random, almost like cliff faces at certain points that you have to defeat a boss to get up the ladder or whatever incline. And so that's kind of what we did here. The first stage of getting up the first level, we did there. Now the idea is that there's the first proper boss battle. Basically, the dungeon, in a way, protecting this areas of the map, ladder up. That's what we're doing here. And this is that this golem boss battle that we get kind of covered in one of the cover pages here. As you can see there. Nothing too fancy in this boss battle. It's fun, but very, very quick. They spend much more time in these sections explaining like what sort of like Lisbeth combined with Asuna have figured out about how the whole building town system works in the game, and that in Rusna Rig, the log cabin is the kind of central building of the town. And when you look at the stats on it, it shows basically a sort of town level, and it gets these specific buffs because they've actually built up the town in the right way, almost by accident. And so it has this like level 1, 2, level 3 buff, including a buff that gives like insane durability to any like secondary structure, basically, that's added on to in a distance vicinity of the central town. And so they do establish that like there's so many people around Rusna Rig that like most of the ALO population has basically come to join Kirito's efforts to make this happen, because it's obviously a huge city, but also you can build your little building on the edge and it gets the same buff that like from the log cabin if you're close enough. And then they also establish stuff like, oh yeah, other people have tried to build their own cities but failed, because they kind of established that if you just in the middle of nowhere, not near another town, try to build a town there, the first building you put down is considered your like primary building, and effectively that more or less triggers a random boss fight. Because the idea is, if you could just put a building down and then build another building and almost like use the system to just get all the buffs, it's too overpowered. So there has to be a counter to that. You have to earn the ability to get those buffs, place your town here. This is the significance of like, it explains why they were attacked initially at the log cabin, and it explains why other people have been attacked trying to form a town and have mostly failed. They have to make it so that it is difficult to build giant player towns, and so that's the significance of Rusna Rig, of course. So that's all very cool. The actual boss fight itself is, of course, this rock golem. So Kirito and Asuna arrive, and the others are already fighting this. Quick sidebar that I do want to mention. Lisbeth is, of course, giving the report on what happened to Asuna initially. And I really like the way she talks about Sinon and Silica, because they led the boss battle attack on the Wasps. And they talk about how, Sinon is the perfect kind of like tactical commander, but then Silica kind of surprised everyone by also being this really good kind of leader, but more in the kind of inspirational and kind of creative sense. And Lisbeth kind of says, she reminded me of Kirito with the creative solutions to things going on there and the kind of charisma type thing. So I just thought that was kind of cool, and it kind of fits like the kind of persona of like, she's this kind of like idol character almost, because she's the little cute beast tamer, but now she has kind of really developed the leadership skills in a way from Kirito to really kind of fit that role like 100%. I just like that kind of description from Lisbeth. And Lisbeth is obviously more of the kind of like leader in the town of like, she's the blacksmith. She really seems to know the crafting system kind of best of everyone, the building system, and you can see how they're all kind of developing their kind of skill sets. But boss battle. So yeah, they arrive there. They're taking decent damage, but they're okay. They know the boss, the attack pattern. It doesn't seem too complicated, but they just can't do damage to it. They're doing the tiniest little chunks of damage to it. It's going to take all day here, and their health will go before the boss's health does. So the whole point here is that when Kirito arrives on the scene, they can't find the weak spot. They can't find a way to do normal damage. And Kirito's looking at the boss's like attack pattern and realizes like, wait, why is it kicking? Why does it do a random kick attack in the middle? And when it kicks, he just gets a glance at something on the sole of its foot and kind of realizes, oh, okay, I think that must be the weak spot. But how do we do that? Because like it only lifts its foot up when it kicks, and that's for literally 1 second. And there's no way the window is that small. We're missing something. So he looks around. He sees pots around the arena filled with oil. Some of them are on fire to light the room. Some of them aren't. So he's like, if we break the ones that aren't on fire, the oil will spill out. If we make it slip over, its foot will be wide open to attack. And so he has Sinon shoot one of them. Everyone lures the monster over into the oil. It slips. They do their first chunk of damage. You get a few little cool moments here where Kirito realizes, wait, I thought this through a lot in my head, but I never really told anyone the attack pattern. Are we actually going to get some damage in here? But some damage actually does come in here. We get like Argo comes in, revealing that she's here. That'll come into play in a second. Yui is also here. She actually has a bow and is actually really good with the bow. They give a quick explanation that she will be better with the bow than she will be with swords because she is the... What is it? She's the top-down AI. That's more like a computer. So it is much easier for her to be hyper accurate with a bow because she just has to keep her body still, be perfect with the aim, which a computer can be, and then just control the hands to release at the right time. Whereas a sword skill is actually very complicated for her to kind of compute accurately. And so this kind of seems to really highlight the idea of like, yes, Yui will be better at being a mage / bow user than she will be at being like a swordswoman. And I think that's the right position for her. They absolutely in this volume double down on the idea that Yui is seen by most at this point as being a player because, you know, she's put in the position here where like has the same kind of, you know, health bar and stuff like that as everyone else. She isn't overly kind of special like she was in some of the other games. She's more like everyone else in this game, so that's kind of cool. But the boss fight doesn't go on for very long. Once they figure this out, okay, they just have to do this over and over again. But no, one of the other guys there from like the previous volumes just decides that like, oh, I'll actually take over here. Let's just walk around in a circle. So every time it tries to get up, the boss targets someone and is just spinning around in circles, still in the oil. So it gets up, slips over, gets up, slips over. And so they don't even have to use any more of the oil or reset positions. They all just kind of walk around it, and it just feels like they like cheese defeat the boss in the end. And no casualties, no real issues at all. They just like win the day. Get up to the next step. There's a little scene with Klein where he's a little bit disappointed when they get up there. Like, it just looks the exact same. And then Kirito's just like, you'll get more of the effect if you look behind us, like off the cliff at where we just came from. And Klein's like, oh, okay, yeah. We're just in one biome, basically, one kind of wedge of the map. But when you're higher up, you can really see that, like, as you go around, there are the different kind of biomes. At this point, we get the explanation from like Argo. She gives like the information. I think we got some of this in the previous volume, that like there are 2 other games that have already reached the 2nd level, Apocalypse Date and then Oscar Empire. And she reveals like a lot of the information about like how people are going about finding information for the game. A lot of it is IRL, like kind of forums, message boards, like you would expect to be the case. That's where information is being distributed, because it's kind of hard to just find information, communicate across the map within the game. So you do that outside the game. So it's a cool dynamic there. But also she explains that also a lot of the ways the other games are finding information on each other is they're basically kind of creating fake accounts, or they're like getting people to start accounts for the other games for the sole reason to kind of jump into their starting location, find out as much information as they can on that wedge of the map, and then report back. This is where a lot of this kind of information is coming from. So the idea of there being spies from all these players who are suddenly turning up in like ALO starter gear, that's the kind of little trick there. And this is effectively where this section of the arc kind of goes. As we're trying to more or less establish a base up here, we have to cross this river. They send Yui across first because she's the lightest on one of the lizard creatures that can cross water. And they're like, oh, it's a fun thing for Yui to do. She was good in the last battle. But then on the other side, this monkey thing comes out of nowhere and just like kidnaps Yui. And so there's a kind of cool chase scene where, like, of course, Kirito and Asuna immediately go after her, and it's a cool kind of parent scene for them. But the whole build to this is when they eventually hunt down this, what seems like at first a monster, but they quickly realize this is a player from another game. This is one of the players from Apocalypse Date, which is a game where the players are anthropomorphic animals. So we've had Insectide, which is where the players are anthropomorphic insects. This is where one is like a monkey man, one is a tiger man, and stuff like that. That's the idea of this game. So they have kidnapped Yui for some reason. Kirito catches up to them eventually, and there's a really cool sequence here where you just get to see sort of the idea of a new player base which isn't used to or really prepared to face someone like Kirito and his skill level. So they think like, oh, 3-4 on 1, we've got him. Because most of these games have a system where it's like you do a big attack, cool down, you can't really move for a while, they can gang up on him that way, and they set up that way. But of course, Kirito is the master of getting around these things, and he's like, sword skill, ends his first sword skill in the perfect position to do another sword skill, ends that in a perfect position to block, and in the perfect position to use his magic attack, the kind of decay, rotting magic that he has. And just in seconds, he's turned this around and has forced like 3 of them into retreat. And then Asuna shows up out of nowhere, does damage to the next guy, and the tables have just completely turned at this point. And they realize, oh, we're up against like top tier players here. And so they just immediately surrender. They get to talking. And because Kirito is reasonable, he does listen to what they have to say. Because, of course, ultimately in this game, no one wants to die because you only get 1 life in the game. Otherwise, you can't log back in. And so, yes, we do get the explanation here about what's happening here. So they explain that the reason they've kidnapped Yui is because of the kind of tough situation they've got themselves into. The Apocalypse Date players who are on the 2nd level, but they've been trying to make progress through this kind of 2nd level, and they've encountered this like forest area. And specifically, the NPCs there have just attacked them the second they encountered them. And they're extremely powerful. No one's been killed yet, but they're super heavily on the run. And they're trying to find a way to basically make progress while, you know, and try and find some sort of a way to maybe communicate with the NPCs. And this is where the whole spying aspect comes up again, where they realize that, oh, we have reports that like Kirito, the Black Swordsman, his group have this amazing base right at the transition between level 1 and 2. They live with 2 separate NPC species, and everything seems to be going like perfect for them. They have a player who seems to have like the ability to speak any NPC language and communicate with them, Yui. So this is where Kirito realizes that, oh, that's why you kidnapped Yui, is because you were hoping to use her to communicate with the NPCs that you're coming up against. Not because you thought that Yui was special because she's an AI. They just think she's a player who has like language skills. So that was an interesting little reveal there. That's why they wanted to use her. Kirito does ask the question of like, why didn't you just come and ask us for help? And they're like, wait, would you have said yes? And Yu is the one to actually step up and say, yeah, I would have helped you. And then Kirito's kind of like, well, maybe. We would have asked a few questions, perhaps. Certainly not now, I don't think we want to help you, but maybe. And it's just this weird thing of like, he doesn't want to say yes, but he's actually this reasonable character. And that's the whole idea. Because especially when we get the big reveal here, which is that what is the NPC race that they're going up against? It's the Dark Elves. And they mentioned that they were saying something about Liusula. And that is the word, the region from SAO. And so Kirito and Asuna have a huge reaction to this because they know that means this is like Kismel related, adjacent. And the big thing here is like, does that mean that we could theoretically meet Kismel coming up soon? But because we don't know what the deal is with Kismel. And that's what is so interesting about all of this, is that Kismel does get referenced. This is all we really get in the book. The reason I didn't bring up the name Kismel, Royal Knight of Liusula, was because it would make things too complicated. And because I was afraid of giving a concrete definition to the faint, misty hope that Asuna and I were currently feeling. It would be too painful to experience the true sadness of loss that we already accepted 3.5 years ago. So, what's going on there? They revealed to the rest of the group that, like, we are emotionally connected to this and so kind of want to help out because we were involved in the Elf War questline in SAO on the Dark Elf side of things. And you get the idea that, oh yeah, Argo is the only character who knows about this because all the other characters kind of properly joined the group much later on after this because of how much we time skip in early SAO and the significance of like progressive filling out the gaps. Argo is the only one who knows about this because like they're into like the floor 40s and 50s by the time like Silka is like introduced into the series and so on. So like you have those kind of situations where like this happened like months before basically within the story. But it speaks to the idea we don't know what happened to Kismel in SAO and how the Elf War questline ended for them at all, and we don't know how that affected like Kirito and Asuna's relationship, because in progressive we're also waiting for like what is the event that sort of splits the two of them up to the point where they're sort of brought back together for the whole murder in the safe zone situation, and then you know the rest of like the original volumes kind of actually pans out. That's what we're waiting to see happen here. And this is almost presenting the idea of like, surely there's no way that, say, in volume 28 or 29, we meet Kismel before we ever know what actually happens to her originally. And this is the idea of like, because there's actually this weird situation where there's now kind of like almost 3 avenues of story that are approaching Elf War questline, where they specifically chose in the movies to skip over the volume the remainder of volume 1, volume 2, volume 3 stuff, and they skipped ahead to volume 4 to specifically avoid the Elf War questline. Now it's coming into the main story, and then we're getting to the point where we're probably just a couple of volumes away in progressive from getting to the end of the Elf War questline, because I think they said something along the lines of like Kirito from the beta test like roughly knows the idea that it ends on one of the upcoming floors. So we're close to the end point. But what's going to happen? Is he going to actually write progressive so we have the ending first to make the reveal here better? You know, that's the kind of interesting point. So we end sort of, for now, that side of the story in Unital Ring with the idea that the group has to make a choice about basically, do they want to work with the Apocalypse Date players to basically negotiate on behalf of them, working with them, with the the Dark Elves. And Kirito and Asuna do. The other players are a little bit more skeptical, especially about working with other players. But you get the idea that probably by the end, they probably do need to work with quite a few different games and players to see what actually happens here. Because, this is where we get into the questions about the overall thing here. It's like, is it a contest between the games, which game wins first? Or is it more about kind of actually all the player bases will need to unite to actually get to the center in the first place? And the significance is like, can you learn the truth about this, which is actually working together rather than fighting against each other? That might be an aspect of it too. But the idea is Kirito temporarily logs out and gets this basically report in the real world, because they quickly reveal that Alice has logged out of Underworld temporarily to send the message to Kirito. Disaster, something is about to happen here, we need you immediately. And so the setup on that side of things, going back a little bit further more into the middle of the book, is that the whole Underworld plot with Alice and everyone, where that ends up going is that right before they're about to basically unfreeze Finatio and a lot of the other Integrity Knights that are here, the cathedral, Central Cathedral, is attacked by one of the giant ships from the previous volume. And it's revealed here that who is attacking them is the Agumar Wezdarath the Sixth. This is the Western Emperor, because again we have this event from earlier on in the Underworld history that happened, which is the Rebellion of the Four Empires. We learned about this in Mooncradle, where I think 3 of them were killed. 3 of the emperors were killed. The Western one there was a lot of questions about. Now we know that that line has survived. I think they talk a little bit about Agumar the Fifth. This is Agumar the Sixth. And he views himself as being, I am the true ruler of the human empire, more so than the Star Unification Council, which is currently in control with the whole Integrity pilots and stuff like that. And he basically says, I will attack the cathedral with my ship and my incarnation weapons, and I will destroy the floors that you are on unless you basically come out and surrender. And they're thinking to themselves, what's going on here? And I it's actually Aerie who's the one who speaks up, and it's like, he's doing this because he's kind of afraid of the Integrity Knights, even though Alice announces herself. This is the whole, in a way, front of the book situation. It's the this kind of cool double page spread, my name is Alice, Integrity Knight, announcing herself to the Emperor guy here. And he initially says oh yeah, I don't care, I don't believe in the Integrity Knights. But the only reason he's attacking that floor in particular is clearly because he wants to destroy the frozen Integrity Knights so that they don't get back into play. Because I think earlier on in the book, Ronier and TS kind of almost allude to the idea, we agree that some of these knights should be unfrozen because I think we will need them for the war coming up, because I think there's going to be some weird taboo index stuff that happens that might prevent some of us from actually attacking our enemy. Whereas the actual Integrity Knights, their descendants say some of this stuff, whereas the actual Integrity Knights are only loyal to the Star King and Queen, and they won't have any problem attacking whatever their true enemy actually is. And I like that. I like to mention that they do allude a few times to the idea that the taboo index is still in place, that a lot of these people don't have full free will to do whatever they want, and the third eye seal thing is still in place. But the Integrity Knights are a powerful force, and they even tease the idea of a lot of the numbered Integrity Knights that we never saw in the series before are in this sort of ancient deep freeze that we'll have to make a decision on later. So there definitely is some cool reveals, I think, probably to come as we go forward. We even mentioned that, Ronier and TS's dragons are also frozen as well. So there's a bunch of stuff that's going to happen once battles actually start getting going and so on. At this point, we're basically in the middle of the action here. And so Alice basically defends the cathedral with her sword, because she's able to block the bombs and stuff like that coming in. But they do make the point that like these incarnation attacks are so powerful, it is at risk of like destroying her sword if she has to defend for too long. Obviously, while this is happening, Ronnie and TS go to like the pilot's kind of base, which is also under attack. This is where like Oiline is, along with like Lorelei and Stika and stuff like that. This is where they end up fighting one of the kind of minion kind of goo monster things. And again, the whole idea here is that these are incredibly difficult to deal with because standard attacks don't really do much to it. Combo attacks can take them down like for a little bit longer. And there's a cool moment where Ronnie and TS kind of save their descendants by doing the 7-hit combo Deadly Sins. And it amazes their descendants like to an incredible degree. They've never seen a combo attack go over 4 moves. And here's a 7-hit attack from their ancient elders, basically. That's a very kind of cool moment. As we're kind of building to the idea of where's the commander? Where's Oiline? Who is he fighting in the middle of the base while Alice defends outside? So Kirito's arrival on the scene is done in 2 separate ways. He quickly arrives and saves Alice from her sword being destroyed by doing some incarnation stuff and kind of stopping things that way. Then we kind of cut away from that and we get from... It's a character who I think was in the last volume. What's his name? Laggy Quint. And so we get it from his perspective as he's poisoned fighting some of these minions. Well, while he's on the ground, he sees Oiline fighting, who eventually is revealed to be Istar, aka the character he calls Kuga or whatever. Now, Laggy, from his perspective, thinks Istar is a man. I'm not sure if that's meant to be the actual confirmation about if Istar is male or female, but you know that's the way he sees it. And again, we do get the back and forth. These two are basically frenemies. They are former friends. They know each other well, but they are enemies now. We don't know the details because we don't know any of the details about Oiline, basically. But the idea is they're having like a sword fight, an incarnation battle. But Oiline is exhausted because he's just fought through a bunch of the minions, and he's about to be taken out. And Kirito arrives on the scene. Of course, we know Kirito can now basically teleport wherever he needs to go. He can basically do the whole cardinal kind of door thing, because he did that to get like Asuna and Alice into the scene in the last time out. So that's where he appears out of nowhere, and that's effectively where the book ends. It's going to be Kirito and Oiline facing off against Istar, and we're going to see what happens here. Obviously, the suggestion probably being that there might be some reveal as this section of the battle comes to an end, or in the aftermath of all of this, we see what happens. Because I'm assuming this attack will probably be fended off. It depends on how big it's going to be. If it doesn't feel like we're quite at the point yet where this is meant to be the full-on attack. It feels a little bit too small scale, and it's like the right thing of like, okay, the enemy are probably going to realize they need to hit them a little bit harder with more forces. But then, what's going on here? Is Istar allied with Ogmar? And to what end? Because obviously their whole thing seems to be like, we will gain control of the Empire, but to what end? Like, is it literally just a power game, like politics in the Underworld? Or is there actually like more to this going on, really? That's the question you definitely have here. So, that's the whole situation here, where like, yeah, we don't really get any reveals about Oiline here. Again, the most significant thing is that he is Oiline Herlens, but he is adopted into that family. We don't know who his actual parents are. There's a bunch of kind of, I suppose, teasing in the past about how Star King and Queen Asuna, Kirito and Asuna did all this stuff. And potentially that maybe Kirito did something as Star King to maybe research the idea of bringing someone back to life or allowing someone to be reborn in some way. And this has maybe led to this situation where Oiline is kind of Yu-Gi-Oh! Reborn to a certain degree. Because again, the divine beast from the previous chapter did refer to Oiline as the Blue Swordsman, but that doesn't match up with like everything as we know it, even though everyone acknowledges this is in essence Yu-Gi-Oh! Under a different name. What's the situation here? What's with the mask? What's going to be under the mask? And how could that actually mean anything in the grand scheme of things? That's the real kind of question that we have here. What is actually going on in the underworld? What does this explain or not explain? So I think that's basically everything I wanted to talk about in this volume. It's very set up, I think is the main thing to say here. There are some nice moments, but we're still in the setup phase. I really feel the next volume has to deliver, and eventually we have to get into a sense of like, I can see where we are heading now, and we're actually at the midway point, or we're getting towards the midway point. Too many more volumes like this, I think, is really going to slow the series down. But then he also needs to do progressive soon as well, because the whole Kismel information is getting a bit weird now about, like, are we going to get the end of her story before we get the start of her story, and how does that all work out? So in the comments, let me know what your thoughts were on SAO Volume 27 and what I had to say about it here. But that has been the video. Thanks for watching, and bye.